Good afternoon, my darlings. I'm still getting used to this new system setup, etc., etc. I'm very, very pleased. It's working all right. Well, welcome to Monday, the 27th of May, and we are tantalizingly close to the end of mayhem. And I bring you tonight a schoolbook classic. The Lord of the Flies. Look how old and battered this is. And this was given to me, and I'll tell you, JD5, 26th of the 11th, 92, by Mr. Wood, my English teacher. Oh my good Lord. Well, what can we say about the Lord of the Flies? Apart from the fact that that's what the children seem to be behaving like these days, in a rather scary fashion. So, you wouldn't want to babysit them, would you? No. Anyway, it was first published in 1954 by Faber and Faber Limited. And this one is from 1975. So the school had had it a wee while before I got it, hence the condition, but I kept it. And tragic as this is, I have to buy myself a brand new copy because, and here's a sad thing, I've lost the back page. It must have fallen out when we were moving house, and I haven't seen it since. But it doesn't detract from talking about the Lord of the Flies. And I would say it's a brilliant work, and it's a frightening parody on man's return to that state of darkness from which it took him thousands of years to emerge. Even the most sceptical reader will surely be carried away by the story's plausibility and power, and it is skillfully written and worked out in its progress by the perfection of its characterization, dialogue, and prose. It's an astonishing achievement, and it's, when you pick it up, you can't put it down. It is beyond frightening. These are normal, everyday schoolboys who have been thrown into chaos due to their aeroplane, unfortunately, crash landing. Yeah. The boy with the fair hair lowered himself down the last few feet of rock and began to pick his way towards the lagoon. Though he had taken off his school sweater and trailed it now from one hand, his grey shirt stuck to him, and his hair was plastered to his forehead. All around him, the long scar smashed into the jungle, was a bath of heat. He was clambering heavily along the creepers and broken trunks when a bird, a vision of red and yellow, flashed upwards with a witch-like cry, and this cry was echoed by another. "Hi," it said. "Wait a minute." The undergrowth at the side of the scar was shaken, and a multitude of raindrops fell pattering. "Wait a minute," the voice said. "I got caught up." The fair boy stopped and jerked his stockings with an automatic gesture that made the jungle seem for a moment like the home counties. The voice spoke again. "I can hardly move with all these creeper things." The owner of the voice came back out of the undergrowth so that twigs scratched on a greasy windbreaker. The naked crooks of his knees were plump, caught and scratched by thorns. He bent down, removed the thorns carefully, and turned around. He was shorter than the fair boy and very fat. He came forward, searching out of safe lodgments for his feet, and then looked up through thick spectacles. "Where's the man with the megaphone?" The fair boy shook his head. "This is an island. At least I think it's an island. That's a reef. Out in the sea. Perhaps there aren't any grown-ups anywhere." The fat boy looked startled. There was the pilot, but he wasn't in the passenger tube. He was up in the cabin in front. The fair boy was peering at the reef through screwed-up eyes. "All them other kids," the fat boy went on. "Some of them must have got out. They must have, mustn't they?" The fair boy began to pick his way casually as possible towards the water. He tried to be off-hand and not too obviously uninterested, but the fat boy hurried after him. "Aren't there any grown-ups at all?" "I don't think so," the fair boy said solemnly. But then the delight of the realised ambition overcame him. In the middle of the scar he stood on his head and grinned at the reversed fat boy. No grown-ups. The fat boy thought for a moment. That pilot. The fair boy allowed his feet to come down and he sat on the steamy earth. "He must have flown off after he dropped us. He couldn't land here, not a plane with wheels." "We was attacked. He'll be back, all right." The fat boy shook his head. "When we was coming down, I looked through one of them windows. I saw the other part of the plane. There were flames coming out of it." He looked up and down the scar. "And this is what the tube's done." The fair boy reached out and touched the jagged end of a trunk. For a moment he looked interested. "What happened to it?" he asked. "Where's it got to now?" "That storm dragged it out to sea. It wasn't half dangerous with all them tree trunks falling. There must have been some kids still in it." He hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. "What's your name?" "Ralph. Here we're meeting Ralph." For the first time, Ralph. Oh, sweet boy. The fat boy waited to be asked his name in turn, but this proffer of acquaintance was not made. The fair boy called Ralph smiled vaguely, stood up, and began to take his way once more towards the lagoon. The fat boy hung steadily at his shoulder. "I expect there's a lot more of us scattered about. You haven't seen any of the others, have you?" Ralph shook his head and increased his speed. Then he tripped over a branch and came down with a crash. The fat boy stood by him, breathing hard. "My auntie told me not to run," he explained, "on account of my asthma." "Asthma?" "That's right. Can't catch my breath. I was the only boy in our school what had asthma," said the fat boy with a touch of pride. "And I've been wearing specs since I was 3. He took off his glasses and held them out to Ralph, blinking and smiling, and then started to wipe them against his grubby windbreaker. An expression of pain and inward concentration altered the pale contours of his face. He smeared the sweat from his cheeks and quickly adjusted the spectacles on his nose. Then Fruit. He glanced round the scar. Then fruit, he said, I expect. He put on his glasses, waded away from Ralph, and crouched down among the tangled foliage. I'll be out again in just a minute. Ralph disentangled himself cautiously and stole away through the branches. In a few seconds the fat boy's grunts were way behind him, and he was hurrying towards the screen that still lay between him and the lagoon. He climbed over a broken trunk and was out of the jungle. The shore was fledged with palm trees. These stood or leaned or reclined against the light, and their green feathers were 100 feet up in the air. The ground beneath them was a bank covered with coarse grass, torn everywhere by the upheaval of fallen trees, scattered with decaying coconuts and palm saplings. Behind this was the darkness of the forest proper, and the open space of the scar. Ralph stood, one hand against the grey trunk, and screwed up his eyes against the shimmering water. Out there, perhaps a mile away, the white surf flinked on a coral reef, and beyond that the open sea. It was dark blue. Within the irregular arc of coral, the lagoon was still a mountain lake, blue of all shades and shadowy green and purple. The beach between the palm terrace and the water was a thin bowstave, endless, apparently, for Ralph left the perspectives of the palm and beach and water drew to a point at infinity. And always, almost visible, was the heat. These boys were on their way home, and unfortunately the aeroplane, for whatever reason, it had to crash. I just need... Oh, that's better. I thought I seemed at a funny angle. Yeah, that's much better. I feel like I'm actually talking to you now. And for whatever reason, the aeroplane crashed. And unfortunately, these boys are the only survivors of the entire flight of private school boys. Yes. And Ralph, bless him, he's the nice one. And the little fat one that we've just met is called Piggy. And Piggy is very dear to my heart. And I love Piggy. And you'll have to read the book to find out what happens to him. Yeah. But he will be your favourite character. And then Ralph. But Piggy is just... he's just the sweetest, loving, kindest, most trod upon boy you've ever met. And then we've also got... oh dear, this book is so old, it's falling apart. We have Jack. And Jack... and Simon. Yes, you won't want to babysit them. They are... well, I would say tribal. Those boys are tribal. They are what we will become if we ever went backwards and not forwards. If there was a national disaster, I reckon the Simons and Jacks of this world would... they would be the survivors, but they would be the brutality of survival. Whereas Ralph is the humanity of survival. And Piggy is... is beautiful. He's the goodness of society, is Piggy. And I just can't tell you any more about Piggy because I'm in danger of ruining it. If I know it's a very old book, it's a very classic book, and I'm pretty sure there are loads of people that will have read it, but there are also loads of people that won't have read it, and if I spoil it, which I may do if I talk too much about him, with lots of different things in here. We have a kind of society with the surviving boys, and at least they are civilized enough to hold up the conch, which is a giant shell, to be able to speak when they are all together. They're called together for a meeting of sorts. And that conch is also the way of miting out punishment, if you like. And you need to find the monster in the book, for it's not what you think. And the boys go back to being very primitive because they are trapped on this island, and then without anybody coming to save or rescue them, they do descend back into tribalism, and they do hunt wild boar, which they believe are the monsters on the island, and they eat, obviously they eat the boars because they roast them over an open fire, which I can tell you they use Piggy's glasses to light the fire by harnessing the sun's ray through them, magnifying it and lighting moss and kindling so that they can light the fire. So Piggy is useful in the fact that he has his glasses, but I do feel he was treated rather brutally. So I'm not going to say any more about Piggy. There are lots of little boys, a lot younger than these older boys, Simon and Jack and Ralph, and they are frightened. They're of an age where they need their mother, and they are frightened and easily led, and are so terrified of Jack and Simon that they'll do whatever they say, which leads to the chaos and the absolute descent into the barbaricness, not only of their survival, but of Simon and Jack being so damned brutal. Ralph being the voice of reason, and let's just say they butt heads quite a bit, and they butt heads, and the ending is just stunning. I'm not going to say if they were rescued or not. Some of you who have already read it know the ending, but to those that haven't read it, you need to find out. And the only way you're going to find out is if you sit there and read the book. I did my GCSE English literature on The Lord of the Flies and of Mice and Men. Those were the two books that we had to study. And reading Lord of the Flies at such a young age set me off on a lifelong love of apocalyptic fiction. So in a sense, I'm very grateful to my school for allowing us to read this book. whether or not schools, oh, excuse me, it's a very late night last night, schools would allow this to be read now for students to do their GCSEs. I don't know. Gosh, when my daughters were doing their GCSEs, they had to do The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. It's a lovely tale, but it's very dry. It's very English, and it's very dry. And this was English, but not dry. This was juicy. This was a very juicy novel, full of brutality and humanity and the descent into chaos and barbarism. As I said, you wouldn't have wanted to babysit these little boys. You'd have probably ended up being cooked for dinner. Yum, yum. So, in conclusion, Britain's going through hell. Of course it is. It's always going through hell. And the aeroplane crashes. It's not ever made clear if it was a mechanical failure or it had been hit by a missile. However, it does crash land, excuse me, on this island, and the boys are left to survive in any shape or form that they can. And some are victors and some are losers. And the ending will leave you dumbfounded. Yeah, I can say that because it's not spoiling it. So I'm trying to do this without spoilers because I don't want to ruin it for you. But, definitely 10 out of 10. William Golding. Oh my love. Wow, schoolboys. Primitive, tribal schoolboys. Dearie me. Yes. And that's why sometimes when I see feral children, the first thing that pops into my head is, ah, there goes the neighbourhood, Lord of the Flies again. And my husband always laughs and goes, you always say that. And he goes, you're always referring to William Golding. And I just say, well, I can't help it. Say what I see. And yeah, society could learn a thing or two about this book. And maybe we should be teaching it in schools again. Who knows? Maybe they will in the future, but they're not doing it at the moment. 10 out of 10. Get yourself a copy. It's either on an audio book or it's on Kindle or it's still in print. It's not difficult to find it, but it's well worth a good read. It's not very long. It's young adult fiction. Had it been done today, I think it would have been printed, but I think it would have been heavily censored. Definitely, because of the brutality and evilness and barbaricness that's in here. Ah, how far we fall when we have no rule of law. And maybe the 1% of the humanity can be wiped from us, so we turn 100% animal. Yes, so many rambling thoughts. But it is worth the read. So I will say what I always do. Happy readings, darlings, and enjoy. And do enjoy the hell out of this book because it is beautifully written. It's glorious. And as I say, it came out in 1954. So it was just at the start of the Cold War. And brilliantly done. I do like my apocalyptic fiction. I do. And I know you will as well. So until tomorrow, my darlings, take care, good evening, good night.